A few years ago, I had a conversation with a guy named Brian in Phoenix. Brian worked in IT support. Solid job. Nothing glamorous, but stable. He earned around $75,000 a year, which for many Americans sounds like a pretty decent middle-class salary. But when we started talking about money, something interesting came up. Brian said something that millions of people quietly feel but rarely admit out loud. He said, if I just had $200,000, everything in my life would change. Not a million, not 10 million, just $200,000. At first, that might sound strange. In a world where social media celebrates billionaires, luxury lifestyles, and million-dollar houses, $200,000 almost feels small. But here's the fascinating truth. For the average middle-class American, $200K can completely change the trajectory of their financial life. Not because it makes you rich, but because it removes pressure. And when pressure disappears, something powerful happens. People start making better financial decisions. Let me explain. Most financial stress in America doesn't come from extreme poverty. It comes from what economists sometimes call the financial squeeze zone. You make enough money to survive, but not enough to feel secure. You pay your mortgage, you cover groceries, you manage car payments and insurance. But one unexpected bill, one medical emergency, one job loss, and suddenly everything feels fragile. That's where most of the middle class lives, one or two financial mistakes away from chaos. Now imagine something different. Imagine waking up tomorrow with $200,000 sitting in your bank account. What would actually change? For many people, the first instinct is to think about buying something, a nicer car, a bigger house, maybe a vacation. But the real power of that money isn't consumption, it's freedom from pressure. Let's break it down with a simple example. The average American household carries about $8,000 in credit card debt. The average car loan is around $40,000. Student loan balances can easily reach $30,000 or more. A mortgage might stretch hundreds of thousands of dollars over 30 years. Suddenly, that $200K doesn't look so small anymore. Because the moment someone uses that money to eliminate high-interest debt, their monthly life changes instantly. No credit card payments, no car loan, less financial stress. And that creates something incredibly valuable: breathing room. Now let me tell you about a couple I met in North Carolina. Let's call them David and Melissa. They were both teachers, earning a combined income of about $95,000 per year. Good people, hardworking, but constantly feeling behind financially. They had student loans, car payments, and a mortgage. Every month, their income disappeared almost immediately. Then something unexpected happened. Melissa inherited around $210,000 from a relative. And here's where their story becomes interesting. They didn't buy a bigger house, they didn't upgrade their cars. They did something far less exciting, but far more powerful. They eliminated debt. Student loans gone. One car paid off. A large chunk of their mortgage reduced. Suddenly, their monthly expenses dropped dramatically. For the first time in their adult lives, they weren't living paycheck to paycheck. And something fascinating happened psychologically. Instead of feeling trapped by money, they started planning investments, planning retirement, planning a small side business. Because financial stress does something strange to the human brain. It forces you to think short-term. When you're worried about next month's bills, it's almost impossible to think 10 years into the future. But remove that pressure and your thinking changes. You start playing the long game. Now let's talk about another way $200K can transform someone's life: investing. If someone invests $200,000 in a diversified portfolio, earning an average of about 7% per year, that money can double roughly every 10 years. Which means that $200K could become $400K, then $800K, and eventually more than $1 million over time. Not because of genius investing. Not because of luck. Just because of time and discipline. And that's the magic of compound growth. But here's the part that people often overlook. The hardest part of investing isn't choosing the perfect stock. It's having capital in the first place. For many middle-class Americans, building the first $200K is the hardest step. Once you cross that threshold, the math starts working in your favor. Let me tell you another story. A man named Carlos in Texas spent almost 15 years slowly building his savings. No big salary, no big windfall. He simply saved consistently. $200 here, $500 there, year after year. Eventually, he crossed that 200K mark in his investment account. And that's when he told me something fascinating. For the first time in my life, he said, money started working harder than I was. That's the moment when the financial game changes. Because until that point, your income depends entirely on your labor, your time, your effort, your energy. But once investments reach a certain level, they start generating returns that feel meaningful. Dividends, capital growth, compounding. It's not instant wealth, but it's momentum. And momentum in finance is incredibly powerful. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger economic picture. In 2026, the American middle class faces enormous financial pressure. Housing costs have exploded. Healthcare expenses continue rising. Education costs are higher than ever. At the same time, wage growth hasn't kept up with many of these expenses, which means financial stability increasingly depends on one thing: assets. People who accumulate assets slowly build resilience. People who rely only on income remain vulnerable. That's why 200K can feel life-changing. Not because it makes someone wealthy overnight, but because it creates the foundation for financial resilience. It reduces risk, it creates opportunity, and most importantly, it buys something that money rarely gets credit for: time. Time to think, time to plan, time to recover from mistakes. And sometimes that's the most valuable financial resource of all. Because the modern economy moves fast. Jobs change, markets move, unexpected events appear. And the people who survive these changes aren't always the smartest or the highest paid. Often, they're simply the ones who built a small financial cushion before chaos arrived. So when someone says, if I just had 200K, everything would change, they might not be exaggerating. Because for millions of middle-class Americans, that number represents something much bigger than money. It represents control. Control over decisions, control over stress, control over the future. And once someone experiences that kind of financial breathing room, their entire relationship with money begins to change. They stop chasing quick wins. They stop reacting emotionally to every market move. They start thinking long-term. They start thinking strategically. They start thinking like investors instead of survivors. And that shift in mindset can be more valuable than the money itself. Because in the end, financial success isn't just about how much money you have. It's about how you think about money. And sometimes the first $200,000 changes everything.